Hi there, my name's Andrew with the American Heritage Museum, and today I'll be taking you for a tour of the Japanese Type 4 Horo, both inside and out. The Type 4 Horo is a Japanese self-propelled artillery piece designed and introduced in 1944. The vehicle's design is actually inspired by that of the German Grille, another converted tank chassis used to propel a 15-centimeter howitzer. Now, the Horo was initially designed for the offensive. However, by the time it entered service, the Japanese were already being pushed back towards the home islands, and so the vehicle was forced into a defensive role instead. Interestingly, only 12 of these vehicles were ever produced, with this being the last known surviving example. Before we get started, I'd like to give you a little backstory on this vehicle in particular. Now, while we don't have all the details of its service history, we do have a pretty good idea. This vehicle was captured by the U.S. Army in the Philippines in 1945, specifically just outside of Clark Field on Luzon. Now, many of these Pacific islands, Luzon included, were rather mountainous and had lots of tall obstacles that got in the way of long-range fire, like this vehicle was designed for. Because of this, most vehicles like this ended up fighting at much closer ranges than they were intended to. Now, because of that, it's believed that the crew of this vehicle saw American forces closing in from a close range and opted to just cut their losses by abandoning the vehicle. Now, this would make sense, as the vehicle's really not designed or equipped for close-range defensive fighting, so they wouldn't have stood much of a chance anyway. Shortly thereafter, the Army captured it and sent it back to the U.S., where it was sent to Aberdeen for testing and research purposes. Once they were through with it, it was put outdoors on display along with a number of other armored vehicles, partially leading to the condition that it's in today. Afterwards, it was traded to the Marine Corps and stored at Quantico for a length of time. Then, we opened our museum in 2019, and shortly thereafter, the Marine Corps was gracious enough to loan the vehicle to us, and we've had the honor of displaying it here in our Pacific War Gallery ever since. As always, we'll start up here at the front. Now, the Horo is based on the chassis of the Type 97 Chiha medium tank, and aside from the addition of a large howitzer and superstructure, the vehicle didn't undergo that many changes at all, especially on the lower half. With that, we have the original front glasses plate, which is about 25 millimeters thick, as well as a tow hook in the center here, and two transmission access doors. Mounted on either side here, we have the drive sprockets, which in this case are mounted in the front, as the transmission is also found in the front. Interestingly as well, on the front housing here, we have a whole bunch of armor cracks, which are just the first of many we'll see on this vehicle. Moving now to the side of the vehicle, we have the rest of the running gear. Now, the Horo, just like the Chiha, uses bell crank style suspension. So what we have here is a system made up of bell cranks, which are like oddly shaped levers, and coil springs tied together using plates and rods. Now, when the vehicle hits a bump, the road wheels will lift up, turning their respective bell crank, compressing at least one of those coil springs, helping to absorb some of the shock of that impact. Now, I don't have time in this video to go over this system in its entirety, but I would definitely recommend looking into it, especially if you're into things like mechanical engineering, because it's really just a neat system. As for the running gear itself, the Horo has 6 road wheels on each side, which are rubber-rimmed and split down the center, because the tracks do use center guides. In the front, we have the sprocket, like we talked about before, which has teeth along the outside edge to grab and drive the track, as we see on the M4 Sherman. The idler is mounted in the rear, and is also split down the center to accommodate those center guides. And along the top edge, we have 3 return rollers. Now, interestingly, 2 of these return rollers are identical, with a split down the center, as you would expect to see on something like this. However, the center return roller is only a half, with the wheel only on the inside edge of the track, because it had to be mounted above this shroud for the suspension system. So there wasn't room for an axle to run through the center, and they had to make something specially for that, which is kind of a neat little thing. Getting back to the front now, we have the main gun and shield. Now, this is where the real big changes from the Chiha come in. Like I mentioned earlier, the Horo is inspired by the German Grille. In fact, it's the exact same idea. The German Grille is based on the chassis of the Panzer 38T, just like this Jagdpanzer 38T. Now, the Grille mounts a 15-centimeter Schwerinfanteriegeschütz, or Heavy Infantry Gun 33, on this chassis. The Horo is based on the Type 97 Chiha, as we already talked about. Now, it uses this chassis to propel a 15-centimeter Type 38 howitzer, which, interestingly, is a design that was bought from the Germans by the Japanese back in the early 1900s. So what we have here is literally just a Japanese version of a German Grille built out of parts that the Japanese had just kind of laying around. Getting back on track, pun intended, the front of the gun shield is about 25 millimeters thick, with the sides about 15 millimeters thick. Now, as I mentioned before, the Horo fields the Type 38 15-centimeter howitzer. This fires a 77-pound projectile to an effective range of about 6,600 yards. Now, as for the mount that the gun is placed in, it could have been a heck of a lot better. As it is, the gun can only elevate to 20 degrees and depress by negative 10 degrees. And as for azimuth control, it only gets 3 degrees of traverse in either direction, meaning that the hull of the vehicle has to be pointed almost exactly at the target, or within 6 degrees of it, to actually hit what you're shooting at. Also found in the gun shield, on the upper right side of the vehicle, we have the commander's viewports. On the lower right, underneath the gun, we have the driver's viewport, and on the upper left here, we have the penetration for the gunner's optic, all of which we'll go over in more detail when we get inside the vehicle. Moving back over to the sides now, we have something really, really interesting. This is an Imperial Japanese naval battle flag. Now, what makes that so interesting is that these vehicles were issued to Imperial Japanese Army units, not Navy units. Now, it's very unlikely that the Army crew members of this vehicle would have painted a naval battle flag on their vehicle, especially due to the resentment that those two branches had for each other during World War II, and it's also fairly unlikely that this was done at Aberdeen, as other Japanese vehicles that were displayed at the same time didn't get the same treatment. So it's really just up for debate. It does appear to be hand-painted, as there are some imperfections on the sun itself, as well as around the edges of the flag, not due to the rusting. Now, this is a really neat thing, because it's completely lost to time. We don't know who painted it, or why exactly, and we'll never know the answer for certain. So we can speculate as much as we want, but there's never going to be a defined answer. Moving back, we have the fenders, with the left-hand fender here showing evidence of pioneering tool mounts, which have since been removed, and the right-hand fender with the mounting point for the jack. On the back end of each fender, we also have the brackets for mounting the mufflers, which are gone. I don't know exactly why or when they were removed, but they are gone. This does, however, allow us to see into the exhaust port on either side. Between those exhaust ports, we have the engine. Now, the Horo is powered by a Mitsubishi Type 100 V12 air-cooled diesel engine. This puts out about 170 horsepower and is capable of getting this 16.3-ton vehicle up to the breakneck top speed of 23.5 miles per hour. Now, it's also worth noting that over on the left side here, we have what appears to be an engine intake cover, while on the right side, that cover is missing. Now, based on the damage that the hinges appear to have sustained, I would venture that that was the result of a violent and likely unscheduled disassembly. Above the engine compartment, we have the ammunition storage box. Now, in terms of ammo capacity, the Horo doesn't have much. The general consensus is that it carries somewhere around 24 rounds, although there's no documentation to back this up. In fact, there's little to no documentation on the Horo at all. This is based purely on similar vehicles' ammo capacity and measurements based off of the shell sizes, but it would make sense to have about 8 rounds in the ammo box up here and another 16 or so in the fighting compartment. Now, it's also worth noting that the Horo uses a 2-part ammunition system, where the projectile and propellant are loaded separately before firing. This 2-part ammunition system is actually pretty common when it comes to dealing with large caliber guns. Take our Soviet IS-2's 122mm gun as an example. This fires 122mm, 55-pound projectiles. This one's actually about 10 pounds, but humor me. This, if it were attached to its case and propellant, would make for a really long, really unwieldy round to load, not to mention store. So, it's all around easier to cut them in two, store them separately, and load them one at a time. At the very rear of the vehicle, we have what appear to be the tow cable mounts, with the leftmost bracket sustaining some serious damage at some point, almost being ripped free from its hinges. Below that, we have 2 tow points, as well as what appear to be the idler tensioning systems, and above that, we have a couple engine access doors. With the outside of the vehicle covered, let's get a look at what's left of the crew compartment. Now, interestingly, there's actually some debate over the crew size of the Horo, with some sources saying 5 crew members and some saying 6. Now, my guess, based on seeing the vehicle and just general observations, would be a crew of 5, with a driver in the front right, commander behind the driver here, gunner over here on the left, and 2 loaders in the rear. Now, keeping in mind that the howitzer fires a 77-pound projectile, it would probably make sense to have 2 people loading the gun, and I really don't see where you would put a 6th person, nor do I see a role that they would be there to fulfill. The crew compartment has a rustic feel with good bones and an open concept floor plan. To the left of the howitzer, we have the gunner's controls, with the left hand wheel used to control the whopping 6 total degrees of traverse, and the front hand wheel used to control the elevation. Above that, we have a wood-lined shelf that I suppose could have been for a radio, although that's purely speculative, and above that we have the gunner's optic. Moving to the right, of course, we have the howitzer. Now, this uses an interrupted screw-style breech, which works by swinging the breech block into place and turning the screw to lock it. Now, this system is not fast by any means and is a contributor to this gun only having a fire rate of 5 rounds per minute. Nestled into the right side of the crew compartment, we have the driver's controls and viewport. Now, from the looks of things, we seem to have a clutch, brake, and accelerator pedal on the floor, as well as 2 sets of levers. Now, my best guess is that one set would be used to apply brakes to either side's track, while the other set would be used for disengaging the drive to either side's track. Now, again, this is just speculation. Aside from that, we have what seem to be a handbrake, hand throttle, and gear selector lever over on the transmission housing. Up in the right side, in the commander's position, we have 2 viewports, one of which appears to have had an optic mounted previously, as there is a bracket coming off the wall that would seem to lend itself well to something like that, as well as a shelf in front of the commander. Tucked in by the driver, we have the rear of the transmission, as well as the driveshaft cover passing back through the center of the floor. At the rear of the compartment, we have what looks to be the high-pressure fuel pumps, as well as the fuel filters over on the right. Outside of that, we have some loose wires, brackets from pieces that have since been removed, and a good few more armor cracks, including in the top of the gun shield. And that just about wraps things up. I really hope you enjoyed the video and maybe even learned a little something new. If so, consider leaving us a like and maybe even subscribing, as it really does help us out a lot. In the meantime, my name's Andrew with the American Heritage Museum. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.